Great. Thanks, everyone. Good morning. Thank you for joining us. Very excited to kick off the second day of the Literary Festival here with our panel on debut novelists. So that's something that we're proud of at the IAAC to have a session like this. I'll just introduce the authors very quickly and the moderator. So Oindrila Mukharjee is the author of The Dream Builders. Her debut novel is an expansive piece on class, gender, and rapidly changing India-America dynamics. She teaches creative writing at the Grand Valley State University in Grand Rapids, Michigan. Welcome. And Priya Malhotra, New York-based writer and journalist. Her debut novel, which is called The Woman of an Uncertain Age, also explores immigrant themes in the US. So actually, I was reading about it, and perhaps a type of person that we might all know in some different ways, so very nice to see. Grew up in New Delhi, based in New York, yes. And Professor Paran Spey doesn't need an introduction, given he's been an active participant of the festival already. His piece on Identity's Last Secret was actually featured yesterday in a session. So with that, I'll turn it over to you, and we're looking forward to this discussion.
Thank you very much, and welcome to this session. We are sorry to begin a bit late, but there was a medical emergency in Priya's family. We are very grateful that she was able to make it. We'll get right to the session and the two brilliant books and authors. I'm happy to endorse what was said earlier, which is that IAAC, since its inception, has been supporting and promoting women's writing by Indian American authors. Last year we had a session which I moderated. I think it was there were books by Monica Bhide and I think Ms. Patel. I forgot her first name it will come back to me. But so it's very important that we showcase writing of this caliber, and I wanted to simply say a few words about the theme of diaspora women writing from India. We could call this the third generation. The first was, I'm going to mention one important writer from each generation, Kamala Markandaya, born in, I think, 1924, and her novels, which deal with this theme of the Indian diaspora abroad, were published from the 50s and 60s. And then another, I'm just taking one emblematic writer from each generation. Then perhaps Bharati Mukharjee, born in 1940, and her, kind of genre-defining novel, Jasmine, published in the 80s, 1989, I think, after Darkness, that collection of short stories when she moved from Canada to the United States. And then, again, an emblematic writer, born in the 60s, I would, pick Jhumpa Lahiri and her book Namesake, once again, trying to define this question of identity and longing, belonging, this tussle between homeland and host country, and I think some of these themes are playing out in these two novels as well. I only wanted to say one more thing as an academic, to offer a kind of schema, though it may not work, but I think the first generation was about the pain of losing India. The second generation, as represented by Bharati Mukharjee, especially Jasmine, where she keeps changing her identity. She reinvents herself over and over again in order to gain access to the host country, the tremendous struggle to get that. And now I think the third generation, which I want to theorize as, again, you can completely deconstruct what I'm saying, but it's about losing both the homeland and the host land and then regaining both. So I think you're moving from diaspora to transnationalism in a way that you can get both the worlds. But it's a huge struggle because you have to lose both to gain both. But as I said, we can challenge both these. So let me get straight into the two novels. Both of them have certain, I think, overlapping similarities, which I'm going to just mention. They are about very strong self-reflexive women protagonists, and who are trying to find themselves, who are really struggling with questions of who they are, their identity, but they are also dealing with questions of love and loss. They are also struggling with family. I think in Priya's novel, it's with the next generation, because the woman of an uncertain age, the protagonist, is in her 50s. And in Oindrila's novel, it's about dealing with your parents, loss of the mother of the protagonist. And it's also about transiting, it's not just about the topos of chronos, that is time, but also about space. So it's about moving from one space to another. In Priya's novel, it seems just across the Hudson River, moving from New Jersey to New York. But New York is such a big thing, and it's really finding herself. Her protagonist is all about struggling to discover herself in New York City. And then, I won't give away the end, but I guess she gets both that setting and this setting. And here, it's her protagonist goes back to India, to Rishipur. It's a fictional place, I think modeled on Gurgaon or Gurugram. But there's a triangulation, because at the back, the real home is Kolkata. So these are some of the similarities. So let me just start by asking both of you a question, which is, you're supposed to be debutantes, right? But of an uncertain age. I won't go into that. But how does it feel? It's a huge struggle, I guess, to come to this point where you've got your first novel out. And please tell us about that struggle, and how does it feel to get that novel out finally?
It's both elation, relief, and a little bit of disappointment, to be honest, because I don't mean to be a downer, but there's a sense of, you spend so long. I have 2 children, and the reason I bring that up is because there's a gestational period of about 9 months, but this is an endless gestational period. It just felt like years and years, like 5 years to write and figure it out, and then edits till the point that the words just turn into a blur. And it just feels like, it would never get done, when you get rejected and this and that, and you look at it and it never seems good enough. I'm sure many, writers can relate to that. And then, you get rejections, and then you're like, okay, it confirms everything that you already knew, that it isn't good enough, writers can be very insecure, but when it's finally out in the world and you can actually see it, there's a sense of like, okay, this is solid, it's real, and there's a sense of relief that it's done. And when people read it and they like it, or even if they don't like it, the fact that they've even read it or they respond to it is very gratifying at a very visceral level, but the disappointment comes when you don't necessarily have all the acclaim, and not just the acclaim, but you don't get all the readers, and you don't have you're setting yourself on Instagram and all of this, and not everybody is able to get that many readers. Very few, not that many people read books, like full like complete books that are not like pot boilers and things. Mine is a novel that's very interior, it's very psychological, and it's not a fast-paced thing. So there's the disappointment when people are like, how many copies have you sold? Did you get reviewed in the New York Times? It's like, no. So there's that kind of disappointment, because when you're a debut novelist, you don't quite know what to expect. So it's a range of emotions, if that makes any sense.
Thank you. And what's your experience been like? You're a creative writing teacher, and I suppose you had an earlier novel as well. So please tell us how it
Sure.
feels having
Yeah.
arrived at last.
Yeah, well, it's been a long journey, but I don't really feel disappointed because I feel really fortunate, and in some ways, I feel like this long. So I've been a creative writing professor for the past 12 years, and I had to go through all of those things in academia, trying to publish something or the other to get tenure. So I was writing short stories, getting them published in literary magazines. And yet, the book is sort of the holy grail, and without that, you feel incomplete. And as a writer, and so that was that was years of, feeling like that's not happening. And I did write a novel. It was my doctoral dissertation, my MFA. I started during my MFA. I went to Emory for a creative writing fellowship. So I was trying. I came here for an MFA, started the novel then, didn't write it for a few years. Finished about 3/4 of it during my PhD, went to Emory for a creative writing fellowship for 2 years. Actually, I gave up multiple tenure track job offers because I thought if I do the fellowship, which was no money or anything, I would finish the book, get an agent, get a book deal, and get a better job. So I was like putting all my eggs in this one basket. And that novel, a lot of agents read it, but I didn't get representation, and then I put it away. And looking back, that was fine. It was a good thing because it wasn't very good, I personally think now. But that was kind of a very long apprenticeship for me. And at the time, I just was in despair because I came to America with this very naive idea that I'm going to write and publish a novel in 2 or 3 years and then go back, and that would be it. And I sort of had to start from scratch. And so it took me a few years to even figure out what was my next novel going to be about. I spent a lot of time in Gurgaon, where my parents lived. And they actually relocated from Kolkata to Gurgaon, which is kind of the autobiographical part in my novel, after I moved to the States. So every time I was going to India, I was spending my summers there. And it was very different. It is very different from Kolkata. And so the contrast and the changes were very fascinating to me. And I live in the Midwest, in a mid-sized city. So that was also very different from cosmopolitan India. So it was all of these different things, cultural things that were influencing me. And when I finally started this novel, I was haunted by the fact that I had not managed to get an agent. I had not managed to, and so I just didn't know what would happen. I never had an agent. My publishing story is very, it's really hard to get a novel published without an agent, unless it's a tiny, teeny press, right? And I didn't have an agent. I finished the book, finished revising it in the summer of 2021, and then I started querying agents. I wasn't even hearing back. And a few agents said no, but very few, because most of them didn't even read it yet.
Yeah.
And I later learned it's because they didn't even get to it. They're so swamped. It's not even that, they didn't even get to it. And how do I know this? Because, Tin House, my publisher, sent out, they usually don't take unagented submissions either, but they sent out this open submission period call for just 2 days, January 1st to January 3rd, for unagented authors with a debut novel, very specific. And I sent them my first chapter, and I thought I have nothing to lose. What are the odds? The agents don't like it, the publisher's not going to like it. Talking about gestational period, this was January 1st, and by mid-February, they made me an offer. So they asked for the whole book, and then they made me an offer, and then they said, you have 2 weeks in which to tell us yes or no. I think you should go get an agent. So I reminded the agents who had my book, and several of them actually said, oh, we'll read it now, and they read it overnight. So that's how I know that they hadn't read it. But my actual agent is someone I hadn't queried, and I did that after I got the book deal. And Jessica, she's with Sterling Law Literistic, and we just really connected. And so, but I got the agent after I got the book deal, right? And it was 9 months from when I signed the contract to when the book came out. And I don't have kids, so that's mine. But it was a whirlwind, right? After all these years of waiting, 9 months was just a complete whirlwind where I had to edit the whole manuscript, then I had to do copy edits, and I had to do, proofreading. And I was teaching a full load of classes and on every committee at the university, and I basically was staying up all night and proofreading. And then as soon as I finished proofreading, I would get an email saying, okay, now write your acknowledgements. by 10 o'clock this morning, and sometimes I would open my email, and this is all to say how amazing Tin House has been for an independent press. Is I would open my email and I would have 7 emails. Can you do this, 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 this? Can you write a listicle for Electric Lit of 7 books? Can you do this interview? Can you do this playlist? And I said yes to everything. And then one day I woke up and it was mid-December and everything was due the next week. So it was just a whirl. I don't think I've had any time to relax or enjoy any of it. It's been just a whirlwind. But there are moments. I mean, the book got a lot of press, which was shocking to me because it's a paperback. I thought, it's an indie press. But Tin House is like doing an amazing job. They only publish 20 books or so a year, and they just go, all out for every book. And I felt very fortunate. It got a lot of press. But there are those little things that it doesn't get, where you compare with other people on Twitter and so on, and you're like, oh, they won this award, they got reviewed in this big place, and mine didn't. And it's so easy to get despondent and to think, oh, why didn't, it's not really doing that well because it hasn't met all these milestones. But honestly, the fact that my book was published on my 48th birthday, by the way, on my birthday, that was the book launch. It was my birthday party. And after like years of waiting, and every time I feel a little discouraged, I just have to go back to the fall of 2021 or fall of 2021, when I didn't have an agent yet. My book was out with agents, no one was responding. And I just thought, second novel, if this doesn't happen, I'm going to have to try and go the administrative route in my university because that's really the only way I can like advance or do anything different or new. Not to diss administrators, they're great, but I just felt like there's no career for me as a writer. I'm not a good fiction writer, I should give up. I was so discouraged at that time. And compared to that, everything that has happened or is happening now feels like a huge bonus. And there are so many people I know who've told me that they would do anything to be in my shoes, and I feel like that goalpost keeps shifting, right? You just want something more, something more, something more. So at some point, I think it's just like perspective. Where were you a few years ago and what were you expecting? So maybe my bar is lower.
No, I guess we want to recognize your struggle and applaud your success. That's most important. Just hold up your books and let's just give them a really big hand. So, congratulations. After the first novel, believe me, the second one will be easier. But now, we are talking about this long gestation and the waiting and the struggle. Can I ask you a question about, age itself or ageism? Because usually, even when we talk about novels, everybody is so youth-oriented. Somebody is in their 20s, their books get promoted, there's a new star, a star is born, that kind of thing. And your novel is all about a so-called aging protagonist, right?
Yes.
It's about coming to terms with, her protagonist is in her 50s, and then her husband passes away, and then she's looking for partners, she finds love. And the book is very self-reflexive because it's like saying, oh, it's like Sex in the City,
Right.
I mean, the protagonist herself is saying that. So can you reflect on that?
I mean, Sex and the City, it is, but it's not that masaledar.
I know. That's the point.
Kind of.
That's the point, which is important because it's much more introspective, and it's much deeper than that kind of, as you said, masaledar. So this whole business about, age or aging and ageism and a kind of self-discovery, which is not a Bildungsroman happening in, when you're...
Right.
So, yeah. Can you talk about that? Yeah.
When I actually started, if this ever comes to it, what inspired it, I was actually, kind of interested in I've always been curious about the lives of others and people and, especially their internal lives. And, the trigger for the novel, which we could talk about, if it comes up, I was very curious about what it means to be that much older, because I was not that, I was in my 30s when I actually, started the idea germinated in my mind. And it just sort of, I wondered what it would be like to, be of that age and kind of go through a discovery, the idea that, that everybody that's young, can find themselves, or, such America in particular is very youth oriented. Everything is like youth oriented, and, everything is anti-aging, and, how can I look 25 and be hot to everyone else? It's a very there's a kind of, whereas, like if somebody's old or, they're aging, there's no sense of like, I should respect them, or, there isn't that kind of thing. But, so I was interested in what does it mean to be older, but yet be fully human in a way where, you're not like relegated to, to this, kind of, this place where you're not really living, you're living life in a vital way, it's like you're just like sitting there and, and nobody's, kind of interested in you. What does it mean to still have desires to progress, or sexual desires, or, romantic desires, or desire to succeed in your career? What does it mean to still in that way to have the things that, to have qualities that particularly in Indian culture, we associate with youth. And, even in American culture, it's kind of, there's a lot of ageism, in the workplace and, in romantic life and in general, what does it mean to have those vital desires, but not still be like exactly like a young person, still acknowledge that your body and your, is not really the same as you were when you were 25. Maybe you're slower, maybe you need more sleep, and, so age does have an impact, but maybe what is the impact of age? Can you still be vital while recognizing the limitations of what you have? Because most protagonists, as Mukharjee rightly pointed out, they tend to be young. And, I put it on my website, about where are the older, middle-aged protagonists, because there are much fewer of them, because that's just not as appealing.
Correct.
As a 25-year-old struggle. Who wants to read about a 50-something-year-old?
No, that's the point, if I can cut in.
Yes, of course.
In a follow-up question.
Yes, of course.
I think that one of the great things about the book is how the protagonist, who is also a mother, and starts dating again after the death of her husband, and her daughter is also dating. And the complications of this intergenerational, I wouldn't call it a tussle, but
right.
And also trying to find the right partner, the great struggle. I mean, she goes on to a dating app, she finds out several people, but there is a moment of awakening. I think that is the very hopeful part of the novel, and she manages to make that transition and in a way find true love, and in the process also kind of returns to New Jersey. So,
yes.
So what happened? Why was New York a kind of, you might say, disappointment or a delusion?
I wouldn't say that New York was a disappointment. So, what happens is that after her husband dies and she moves to New York, she's a very passionate woman who maybe did not have an opportunity, or maybe did not have the gumption to sort of seek herself, because her husband was not very, he wasn't a very controlling man, but, she was sort of caught up in, the sort of conventional life, even though she had a very active, imaginative life. So there was kind of that sort of dichotomy. So she would kind of, go off and imagine Madame Bovary and having an affair and all that, but wouldn't actually act on it. Now, when this happened, there was a kind of a sort of a freedom in her. So, a freedom that she experienced, and New York represented that freedom, that anonymity, but in which case she actually rejected New Jersey and everything, because she was like, now I'm new, I don't want to have anything to do with, those old-fashioned people and, all of that. And, I mean, there's a moment where, and it talks about, she falls in love with her daughter's boyfriend. She's, doing all of these, sort of very transgressive things. But then when later on, as she matures, she kind of goes back to New Jersey and realizes that just because New York is great and is wonderful does not mean that she should have disdain for her previous life. There are wonderful things about the people that she's known and how they welcome her. So I think she tries to say that I'm going to that I'm going to have both worlds and at once, where she rejected that in an almost childish gesture. No, I don't want to, I don't want to have anything to do with that, because that's, but where she sort of evolves and, when maybe New York always doesn't treat her that well, and, she evolves and says, maybe, there are, good things and bad things about both, in a similar way with arranged marriage. I tried to, initially she's like, yeah, whatever, he wasn't that, cool or whatever, he was kind of bored. But then, when she, a lot of, not, when she gets rejected in, cold ways and in a non-arranged, sort of romantic setting in New York, when she sort of gets dumped and stuff, she's like, maybe there are good things about that. It's not an endorsement of arranged marriage or a criticism, but she realizes that both aspects or several aspects have their pros and their cons, and that was my goal, to sort of embrace complexity and sort of multifaceted ways of viewing different things, rather than rejecting or embracing one way of doing, one approach versus the other. I don't know if that makes any sense.
Yes, totally. In fact, the moment of awakening, in a sense, is about reconciling, and not rejecting, the roots of the past, and yet acknowledging the movement into the future, into a new self. And I think that's a good way to sort of segue to your book, because often we'll see that, all these diaspora novels are actually a farewell to India, it's like a passage out of India. And a part of your book is also a sort of a very disillusioning experience of this new India that is represented by Gurgaon. But at the same time, there is a kind of reconciliation when the protagonist's father returns to Kolkata, which represents, in that sense, the older world of, gentility, harmony, compassion, and you just might say kindness, as opposed to the new world. So, do you want to talk about, this movement between India and the US that your protagonist is really struggling to come to terms with?
Yeah. So one of the interesting things is that you say protagonist, but I don't think of Manika as the protagonist at all. The book actually has 10 different points of view. So each chapter is from a different point of view, and you don't know who's coming next, but you've met them already. And it is bookended by Manika. So she has 2 and everybody else has 1. That's the only thing. So I thought of Manika as kind of a narrator, MC, almost like a Nick Carraway type person who sort of helps you get into that world. She has the outsider-insider perspective because she has lived in the US. She's a creative writing professor in a very small, idyllic, fictional Midwestern college town called Heathersfield, and she goes back for a summer after her mother's died, and so she does represent the immigrant in America and the insider-outsider perspective. But the book has 9 other very important characters, each of whom has a chapter, and they're from very different backgrounds. There are 5 men, there are 5 women, some are working class, some are solid middle class, but out of place in this very yuppie town. And I also don't think of Gurgaon at all when I think of the book, because Rishipur is a fictional city. It's true that Gurgaon inspired it, but I completely just did whatever I wanted with Rishipur. And if it reminds people in India of Gurgaon, that's really interesting and also useful, because I do want people to, project whatever they want onto it. But I really wanted it to be a fictional city, kind of like almost like an Oz type city, which is just, more glamorous, more glitzy, and even more, I think, all the things that I found in Gurgaon, they're kind of exaggerated. But also, like you were telling me yesterday, Gurgaon is a lot more complex than what it seems. And maybe Rishipur isn't, because it's meant to represent certain things. It's very artificial. Even the plants are artificial. And, but someone comments on how, well, everything is wilting. It's a scorching summer. There's been no rain. There's famine, and you know the flowers are wilting. So naturally, people have to have plastic plants, because you know, artificial plants, because the real ones aren't going to grow. So it's not all that, you know, everybody's evil, but it's just the product of the environment. But it is a very artificial setting. It's very aspirational. It's very yuppie. It's very, you know, people are there to make money and to for not even professional opportunities in a sort of fulfilling way, but just like material aspirations. That's what it represents. And it's kind of a dazzling city at first. So, you know, and of course, one of the characters is Maneka's father, who's recently widowed and grieving, and he misses Kolkata. So from his perspective, you have the old world. He's a complete misfit here. He doesn't know what he's doing here. He hates Rishipur. But then there are other characters who love Rishipur. So I feel like when you're talking about multiple perspectives, that's exactly what I wanted to explore, because you see someone maybe at a party in the book and you think of them in a certain way. Maneka thinks of them in a certain way, and then when you come to their chapter, they're totally different. You know, they have these secrets and these desires and this background that you didn't even know about. And so I just feel like that's sort of like you don't really know what's happening in someone's life. And also, you know, just the idea of empathy, that if you haven't walked in their shoes, you really don't know what it's like. I wanted to explore that, and it's the same with the places, which I feel are very complicated. So Shomiron, Maneka's father, really misses Kolkata and wants to go back there. And Maneka is very opposed to the idea at first, because she's like, you won't have the right hospitals, this place is more, you know, modern, there are more opportunities. She has her own personal reasons for not wanting to go back there, because so one of the big, actually, I think of Rishipur as the protagonist, but there's also a big thing happening where, you know, there's a real estate boom in Rishipur, like there has been in Gurgaon, I guess. But it's sort of, the bubble has kind of burst. Everybody invested in these condos and towers, but now the constructions are stalled. Many of them are stalled and the buildings are not being completed. And so people have invested a lot of money, including Maneka's parents, who have lost their savings because they actually invested in one of these condos. But there is one new property that is coming up, and it's coming up very rapidly, and that is Trump Towers. And Trump Towers appears in every chapter, and everybody has their own reaction to it. You know, some love it, some hate it, some are indifferent to it. So that's kind of like another recurring theme. And you know, that's also sort of a contrast to what Shomiron is like. I'll go back to Kolkata and it's going to be laid back and it's going to be charming. But Maneka is like realizing, and even Shomiron is, but he's in denial, that Kolkata is changing too. Right, like there's inflation, and at one point he's like, yeah, this cousin is going to find me a place there, and he describes a tower which is exactly like the towers in Rishipur. And Maneka is like, I hope he realizes that when he goes back there, he's going to find it changed, because that's what happens to our hometowns and our home countries. So Kolkata to him is kind of like India to Maneka. Right? It's not going to be the way you left it, and you're going to idealize it and romanticize it. And then Heathersfield, the whole book is set in Rishipur, but Heathersfield is the place that everybody's curious about in India, and they keep asking her, and it's just this little idyllic Hallmark-like town with, you know, a lot of beautiful, a lot of nature, natural beauty, and, you know, people picking fruit and making jam and, you know, things like that. It's very different from New York. It's very different from the cities in America that most Indians in India think they will emigrate to, you know, or that Maneka thought she would. And so Heathersfield kind of has this strange, everybody's like, oh really? Like you have one mall there? Rishipur has 45 malls. You're in America and we are in India. So there's a big role reversal, right, of what we expect. So it's really how expectations are completely subverted, and places disappoint you or surprise you or are not what you think they are unless you live there. You know, the stereotypes are not real, and it's the same with the people that we meet. So I just feel like I was also just constantly trying to complicate the idea of any kind of binary, like you cannot make up your mind about anything because you're going to be proved wrong.
Perfect. How are we doing for time? Because we started a bit late, so.
You can take those extra
Okay, so what we'll do then is maybe we can invite both of you to read, excerpts, and then we can get questions. But I just wanted to say that the reason I brought that up is because the novel, in a way, interrogates this tremendously hyped narrative about the new India, because not just Rishipur, but the Trump Towers, which is also very political because they get burned down,
Oh, that's a huge spoiler.
But
Don't tell anyone else.
Yeah, no, but it's very carefully prepared. It's very carefully crafted. Actually, both the novels are very well crafted. So, I want to also emphasize that. There's a lot of work that went into these books. And they're not written to formula. I didn't want to give away your ending, which is, how the romance, as it were, flowers in the end in a very unconventional way. But I guess let me just then ask you to read an excerpt each,
Yes,
and then we can throw it open to the audience. Is that okay?
Sure.
Yeah, go ahead.
Okay. So I think I'll read very quickly an excerpt from two chapters. One, Pinky. She's a facialist in a spa who basically does facials for all these rich women. And then Jessica, who's a single mother and entrepreneur, and she is a caterer, and she's very bohemian, but she also, because everybody in Rishipur needs more money, okay, so she also works as an escort. And so I'll just read these two so that you can get an idea of two different perspectives. So Pinky has been taking her shoulder's been hurting a lot because she gives massages after the facials. So she's gone to the doctor to get checked out. Can you give me more painkillers? She asked anxiously. Dr. Prakash shook his head. At this rate, you will have kidney failure in a few years. You need to stop popping the pills. But I have to give massages. She stopped and looked at him, pleading silently to make the pain go away. He put down the films and peered at her over the rim of his reading glasses. You cannot give any more massages for a few months. You have to stop. If you don't, you'll lose the arm. It will become inert and you won't be able to ever use it again. Is that what you want? She stared at him, feeling miserable. The spa counted on her to give massages. I could cut them down slightly, she offered, trying not to think about how Khanna ma'am would react to that suggestion. I am telling you that you should not use your right arm for any lifting or pushing down for about 3 months. Then, once it heals completely, you can resume. But if you don't rest it now, he stopped ominously and looked at her like a schoolteacher issuing a warning. Pinky gathered her things and got up to leave. The doctor stood too. His expression had softened. In 3 months, it should be fine. She nodded. How's Dilip? Okay. Has he stopped drinking? Do you think that's possible? Ask him to come and see me again, he said, for a checkup of his liver. When Pinky walked outside the clinic, the surrounding market was crowded and lights flickered inside little shops. In the aftermath of the storm, the world had become quiet and still, as if it regretted its outburst. Since no rain had fallen, the roads were left drier than before from all the dust that had blown around. The temperature was already beginning to rise again, and this time it would be even hotter. Overhead, the moon was full and coppery above the roofs of the high-rises. On the horizon to the far right, the gold letters spelled out the words, Trump Towers. All through the day, the sign stood there, high above the others, a constant reminder of the construction that was ongoing beneath it. But once the sun set, it became a carnivalesque billboard, flashing its presence across the city and even on the highway that led away from Rishipur toward Delhi in the east and Rajasthan in the west. Like the neon signs that announced the presence of malls or the luminescent logos of five-star hotel chains, this one signaled an opulence that to Pinky was beyond the realm of dreams. Her fantasies were spun from simpler cloths. That her husband would stop drinking, that her son would get a job, any job, that her daughter would pass her exams, that her shoulder would stop hurting. She stared at the sign absent-mindedly while waiting to cross the thoroughfare, but could not wrap her head around what the finished construction would look like or what kind of interiors the builders were designing. The property was located just 2 kilometers away, but to her it may as well have been on a distant planet, one that could be sighted every evening across the skies, alien and out of reach. I'll just read a little bit from Jessica. On Saturday evening, lights burned through the windows of the Monsoon Palace. It was just another night in an endless summer when the rain promised to wash away everyone's troubles, but proved to be a trickster, just like the politicians and the numerous buildings that lay unfinished across the city. Unlike those skeletal buildings, however, the 7-star hotel was bursting with life tonight as it waited like a bride dressed up for a big fat Indian wedding. America had sent its prince to Rishipur for the weekend. The news had been all over for days. That morning there had been a palpable buzz around town at the spa Jessica had visited to get her legs waxed, and at the health food store where she had stopped on her way back to buy chia seeds and soy milk at exorbitant prices to bake a cake ordered by a customer. A large billboard at the intersection in front of the hotel showed the American guest's face as he grinned down at the traffic, his eyes bulbous and his dark hair slicked back. His teeth sparkled diabolically on the billboard, where he posed next to the Bollywood superstar, whose last name, Khan, would likely arouse suspicion at immigration counters in airports across America. But here in Rishipur, 50 kilometers away from the nation's capital, nobody cared about politics. Leave all your troubles behind when you come home. The slogan for the Trump Towers property on Omega Road reassured any potential resident that the ordinary troubles plaguing millions of Indians every day, pollution, misogyny, communal violence, and of course poverty, would be banned from its premises. The US President's son had flown nearly 12,000 kilometers on Dad's private jet to remind investors of this fact. That was why the celebration had to be held nowhere else but at the Monsoon Palace. Perched on an artificial hilltop, removed from the concrete jungle that was Rishipur, it glittered in all its bejeweled glory on this scorching, bone-dry night. Jessica climbed out of the plush, chilled interior of the gold Mercedes that Mukesh Tripathi had sent for her. A uniformed valet held open the door of the car. As she stretched her legs and tossed her long curly hair back, Jessica offered him a slight, almost imperceptible smile. She knew them all, and they knew her, but the valet merely saluted her smartly in response, clinging to the position assigned to him, unwilling to acknowledge her. So, it was going to be like this then, a night of performances. Just stop there.
You know, interestingly, after reading your book or during the reading, I started looking up Trump Towers in Gurgaon, and after a hiatus of about 6-7 months, it's really coming up well. And for those who are interested, I'm not making a promotion, but the apartment started 3.5 crores, which is not all that bad. Come to think of it, yeah, not all that bad. Or
The
maybe
Lamborghini costs more in the book.
I know, that's right. Or maybe it's 5 crores. Anyhow, it's less than $1 million. So please, it's your turn now.
I want to say her book is so realistic. I was like amazed, you know. I mean, it's a fabulous book, but you know, I was like, wow, I grew up in Delhi and I'm like, I can see all of this. So, you know, it's really, really good. I encourage you to read it. So here is, you know, it starts at the, you know, kind of the beginning of the novel where she's about to meet her daughter's boyfriend, who is, you know, about, you know, 11 years old, younger than her, and about 11 years or so older than her daughter. And so she's on the way, and she's in the subway. And so here it is, and so it says, you know, she sees sort of an Indian woman, and she's overhearing this conversation. Do you know who this is, beta? The sallow-faced woman said to the little boy, pointing to another woman in jeans and a heavily embroidered kurti. He shook his head. This is Mala auntie. She is Akshay's mommy. She has just moved to the US. So who is this, beta? A mustache man said, who appeared to be the boy's father. Let's see if you remember. Mala, the boy replied. No, Rohit. The sallow-faced woman lightly tapped the boy on his leg. Don't you have any respect for your elders? Taking their name like that. Bad boy. It's Mala auntie, okay? Understand? Sorry, the boy said, looking down. Sorry, Mala auntie. Naina rolled her eyes. She was thankful it wasn't her being called auntie. She hated being called auntie, the all-purpose ubiquitous moniker Indians use to refer to any lady significantly older than themselves. In her only notable act of rebellion during her early years in Jersey, she had insisted on being called Mrs. Mehta or even Nana by her children's Indian friends, maybe even tia or tante, which meant aunt in Spanish and French respectively, or even teta, which mean aunt in Czech. Any of them would have been acceptable, but not auntie. When she thought of the word auntie, she imagined someone stout, round in the middle, in a sari with dyed black hair. Someone, in short, like her mother. Becoming an auntie in the recesses of Nana's mind was to become someone who was never admired, who was never admired, but commanded the sort of sterilized respect that all mothers automatically received. An auntie was someone who dreamed of nothing but the joys of her children, someone who always spoke of pleasures in the past tense. Nana would have preferred to be called Didi as an older sister, commonly used to address younger women, because Didis could still be young and fresh. Didis could still have suitors. Didis could still have richer futures than past, sparse, but she never suggested being called that, fearing that such a request might be seen as too outlandish. So this is one part of it, and now I'm going to go towards the, another part of it where, somebody has just proposed marriage to her, and she's a lot older. She's, in her mid 50s, and she's contemplating this. She says, he put his hand over hers, which was clasping the arm of the lounge chair. Promise me you'll think about this. Nana still said nothing. She was astounded by his declaration, and she was trying hard not to let it show. She hadn't seen this coming. That's the marriage proposal. She hadn't suspected it. She hadn't even imagined it, except during her fleeting nighttime reveries. She never expected it to turn into reality. She heard herself muttering a vague, "Yes, of course I will, darling." The surprise continued to sink deeper into her, as did the exceptional weight of having to make such a difficult decision. She saw herself slipping into her own world, absorbing the import of Faisal's words, beginning to contemplate the query facing her, and preparing for the myriad thoughts and feelings to present themselves. But she stopped herself. Faisal, who was silently slumping, looked fragile and vulnerable. His gray hair appeared pronounced. The shadows under his eyes stood out under the harsh light of the porch. His mouth looked like it was sagging, and his body looked heavy, as if it contained more than the weight of its 57 years. Nana stroked his hair, telling him that she loved him, telling him that she was lucky to have him in her life, telling him that she couldn't imagine her life without him, telling him that she would seriously consider his proposal. That night, Nana lay tossing and turning as Faisal slept, glad it was their last night together in Jamaica, and that tomorrow night she would be ensconced in her quandary in her own nest. She was vexed and confused, surprised by the size and intensity of her own reaction. She didn't want to get married. Not now, not ever, not to Faisal, not to anyone. The thought of living with anyone made her cringe, made her frightened, made her fiercely protective of everything that was hers. All things in her own life, small or big, now glowed in her imagination like fragile twinkling pleasures in danger of being snuffed out. She liked sprawling on her bed, her big queen-size bed, diagonally, with her legs on the right side and her head on the left side. For the 3 or 4 nights she slept alone. She liked reading alone late into the night with her bright bedside lamp on. She liked being the sole owner of her apartment. She liked her mailbox containing no one else's mail except hers. She liked watching the Travel Channel by herself without arguing about it with anyone. She liked ordering in Chinese food without being told which dishes could be prepared in the same amount of time it took for delivery, that were much healthier and tastier. She liked spreading her bath and body products all around her tub without being questioned about why she needed so many products. She liked eating achar from the jar with a spoon and then using the same spoon to put achar on her plate. She liked coming home to utter silence. She liked not having to always see someone every time she came home, to always feel the weight of their presence fill up the empty space in the apartment. She liked evenings where she didn't have to figure out why the other person was silent or sullen. She liked sometimes retreating into herself without having to explain or defend herself. But most of all, she liked being in a space where the tentacles of no one else's needs could reach and prey upon her. The way Nana saw it, marriage or even living together at this point in her or Faisal's life made no sense at all. They'd both been married before, they'd both shared a home with someone else, they'd both woken up to the same person for ages. They had both endured another person's presence when they wanted to be alone. They had both practiced keeping silent and going to the kitchen when they wanted to scream. They had both eaten food they could barely swallow while their spouse, eating the same food, smacked his or her lips with delight. And obviously, at their age, there was no question of that business of procreation and raising a family. Also, for her, marriage would bring unnecessary complications. Amaya, her daughter, had begun taking to Faisal, and her and Mukul occasionally met up with the two of them. But marriage, the marriage of her mother, how would Amaya feel about that? As for Karan, he had still not met Faisal, refusing to even acknowledge him when they spoke, which was not often. Just one more minute. And when they did, Karan's voice was all hard and metallic, ready to shear. Marriage had conferred respectability when Nana was in her 20s, but now, at least in the eyes of many Indians, it would be seen as anachronistic, as a silly way to mimic the crazy ways of American society. Why take on the added hassle? Once again, she thought of Garcia Marquez's Love in the Time of Cholera, remembering what Fermina Dasa's daughter Ophelia said about her 70-plus old mother having an affair with sweet, pathetic Florentino Ariza. Love is ridiculous at our age, Ophelia had said, but at theirs, it is revolting. Why did she want to open herself up to being mocked when she could easily continue having a clandestine affair? That's it. Thank you.
I guess we're out of time. Yeah, there are books outside, and I guess the authors will be happy to sign them for you. Do we have time for one question each or no? One, because we started late, she came in late.
No, it's my fault, I had a medical situation,
No, it's not.
I apologize.
Okay, there's another session on, so I guess you can continue the conversation outside. So once again, a big hand to the...
Thank you. And thank you to Makaran for being such a wonderful moderator.
Oh, my pleasure. Thank you.
Thank you.